Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. I did read 100 books this year. I'm not gonna go into like a super in-depth summary of each book. I'll just kind of give you maybe a sentence or something about my impressions or ideas or thoughts about it. But yeah, I'll just give you the book, my star rating, and then just kind of maybe a general impression, idea, if I liked it, loved it, a sentence, maybe something like that. So I'm just gonna go in order of when I read it. So the first book I read in the year to the last book I read in the year. And I started off with rereading Harry Potter. So I actually reread the first one in the year 2020, and then the rest of them I reread in January 2021. Yeah, I just reread Harry Potter. When I was reading the first 3-ish books, the first book I was kind of meh, it's kind of meh. And then the second book I was like, okay, typical, whatever, it's fine. By the time I was getting to the third book, I was like, oh, this started to get interesting again. And then the fourth book I was like, oh, this is why I love Harry Potter. And then throughout the books, I just love it. I loved revisiting this world. I loved seeing these characters again, and I really enjoyed it. This time I listened to the audiobooks and they were super fun. That being said, we all know we don't support J.K. Rowling's views here. Transphobia is not acceptable, and that's really sad. It was a very nostalgic read. Okay, the next book I read was Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I gave this 3 stars. I thought it was fun, it was cute, and yeah. The next book I read was The Well of Ascension. I think I enjoyed this one more than I did the first one. Yeah, I gave this one 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it. It was fun. And then the next book I read was Song of Achilles. I gave this 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. Yes, gay Achilles. Yes. It's very popular on Book Talk and Bookstagram and the book community for good reason. And it's really fun. So yeah, 5 stars to this one. And then the next book I read was Ready Player One. I did not like this. I pretty much hated it. I gave this 2 stars because I understand why people might like it, but I really disliked all the sexism, all the misogyny, and our main character was just so yeah, so I didn't really enjoy it. Yeah, and the stakes, no stakes whatsoever. The stakes were non-existent. The next book I read though was Circe, also by Madeline Miller, same author as A Song of Achilles, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it, but I don't know what was totally missing in this book to not make me give it 5 stars, but I really enjoyed it. This cover is gorgeous. The next book I read was also by Madeline Miller, and it was Galatea, which I believe means milky white. I really enjoyed this retelling of a Greek myth. I gave this one 3 stars. It was fun, it was cute, it was short, easy to get through. The next book I read was Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and I gave this 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It was fun, it was gritty, it was dark, and yeah. It was a dark academia book. This is what I would categorize as a dark academia book. The next book I read was The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. I really disliked this book. I gave it 1 star. I really disliked this book. I thought it was messy. The character introductions were so bad. If you're gonna put a plot twist in books, they have to be at least somewhat predictable in terms of I could have figured that out. Even if I didn't figure out the first read, maybe through a reread, I'd be like, oh, I'm picking it up now. But it kind of just came out of left field, had no bearing into the actual thing, and it was just kind of meh. The next book I read was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is the prequel of The Hunger Games, and this is President Snow's kind of backstory leading up to The Hunger Games. And yeah, it was okay. I just felt meh about it. I thought it was kind of unnecessary to have in this world and stuff, but it is what it is. I think it was longer than it needed to be. The next book I read is the 3rd book in the Mistborn trilogy, and that's The Hero of Ages. And yeah, I really enjoyed this one. This one was probably my favorite of the 3, and I gave this a 3.5-ish to 4 stars. I'm not totally sure. 3.5-ish stars. I enjoy the trilogy in general, but it was more on the meh side for me rather than the I love it side. I know a lot of people really loved the series, but it was more on the meh side for me, this trilogy. The next book I read was Warcross. I enjoyed this first book. I gave it 3.5 stars, and yeah, it was fun. It was fun. And then Wildcard, the second book in this series, I gave 2 stars. I really I disliked this book. I thought they made the main character so bad afterwards. Like, she started off so strong and so fun in the first book, but then in the second book it was just bad. I didn't like it. The next book I read was 10,000 Doors of January. I gave this 2.5 stars because I basically disliked this book throughout the entirety until the very end. I really enjoyed the ending of this book, but the whole way through I was really trudging along, and yeah. The next book I read was A Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, and I felt meh, but like I enjoyed it more than meh. So I gave it 3.5 stars. Yeah, it was a fun time. It's very atmospheric, so if you like that, maybe you'd like this. The next book I read was Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett, and I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed it. It's kind of like Six of Crows, but make it like more adult, more gritty. I gave it 4.5 stars. Really enjoyed it. The next book I read was 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act, Helping Canadians Make Reconciliation with Indigenous Peoples a Reality by Bob Joseph. And I didn't give this one a rating because I don't give like non-fiction books ratings because I just don't know how to rate those. I don't have a rating system for my non-fiction books. And I thought this was super helpful. I thought it was dry, but it was helpful. And a lot of important things were said, so yeah. The next book I read was the second book in the Foundryside trilogy, which is Shortfall, and I gave this 4.5 stars as well. I really enjoyed it. I'm really excited for that third book to come out. Next book I read was, this is where I started my Wheel of Time journey. So I started The Eye of the World, and I really enjoyed it. I generally don't enjoy like time elements in books, but I'm intrigued to find out more about this one, and I gave it 4 stars because I enjoyed it. It wasn't my favorite book, but I also understand that we're really starting to set the world first and like build the world, so I'm really excited to get to all that, like, you know, that high fantasy stuff, you know? The next book I read was The House in the Cerulean Sea. Oh my god, it was one of my favorite books of the year of 2021. I love this book so much. I gave it 5 stars. It's such a cozy fantasy and so heartwarming. It is, it's for everybody to read. I love it. The next book I read was the 5th season, the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy, and I really enjoyed this book. I gave 4.5 stars. It is great. I love that this was probably, like, I was starting to really get into like adult fantasy books this year because I want to get more into adult fantasy books, just because YA books have themes that I enjoy, but like I want more. I'm wanting more adult content, I guess. I'm wanting more adult themes. So that's why I've been trying to branch out more into adult fantasy, and this was really great. This was fun. It was really dark, so warning for that. The next book I read was Halsey's poetry book, I Would Leave Me If I Could, and I really enjoyed this poetry collection. I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I did, but it makes sense because one of the things I really loved about this book was its rhythm, and it makes sense because she's a musician, so why would I not think it would be rhythmic? It was fun. The themes in here were very relatable. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was The Beast Player. I gave this 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this book, and it was not what I was expecting. I think I really enjoyed that there was like basically like no love story aspect here. I really enjoyed that. The next book I read was The Hate You Give. I gave this 4 stars just because a lot of the themes talked about in here were kind of things that we live through in real life already. The Black Lives Matter movement. So a lot of this wasn't new, and I don't think it would have been all that new either prior to the Black Lives Matter movement, just because I'm very passionate about social justice and I'm very passionate about anti-racism practices. It was a great read for me, but it was also a lot of emotional labor. It also kind of felt like this is a good book for people who have no idea about anything about Black Lives Matter or about social justice or anti-racism practices. And I think this is a really great way to get into understanding Black Lives Matter. The next book I read was This Is How You Lose the Time War. I hated this book. I absolutely hated this book. I gave it 1 star. I hated this book. I thought it was messy. I thought the writing was way too flowery for what it had to be. The storyline and the characters were just bland and boring, and I didn't care about anything in this story. It was so short though that I was able to get through it. I really contemplated DNFing this, but I wanted to understand why everybody loved it. I still don't understand. I don't like it. The next book I read was Damien by Hermann Hesse. And this one was weird. I gave it 3 stars because I didn't really know how to feel about it at the time. I still don't really know how to feel about it. I think I liked it, but I still don't know how to feel about it. So I gave it 3 stars, in middle of the road kind of rating because I didn't know how to feel about this. The next book I read was my Dark Vanessa. I really enjoyed this book. This is also one of my favorite books of 2021, and oh my god, I've talked about this book many times on my channel. Love it. You can check out many of my other videos. I'll go into more depth about it. I have a whole review about it too, so I could link that if you want. The next book I read was The Empress of Salt and Fortune. I enjoyed this book, but I felt more kind of meh about it, so I gave it 3 stars. It was a fun time. And then the next book I read was When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain. It was kind of like the second book to this series. It's kind of a companion. I don't think you need to read one to read the other, but When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain, I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed this one. I enjoyed it a lot more than that first one. The next book I read was the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy, which is The Obelisk. I didn't enjoy this one. I gave this one 2 stars. I thought it was I think it suffered from that second book syndrome where we were kind of like trudging along to get to the third book, and it was just kind of like meh. I didn't enjoy it. I kind of disliked it. I gave it 2 stars. The next book I read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I really enjoyed this book. I understand why it's so well loved, and it is 4.5 stars. I gave it 4.5 stars, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. The next book I read was also one of my favorites of the year, and it's A Man Called Ovi. Again, I've talked about this book many times on my channel at this point, and I really enjoyed it. 5 stars. Great book about a grumpy old man. Yes. The next book I read was the second book in the Wheel of Time series, which is The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan, and I gave this 4 stars. Again, I really enjoyed it. I'm really excited to get to know more about this world. And I have a review up for like the first 3 books of the series, and I'm currently on the 4th book, but I kind of putting it on hold right now. I'm not in the mood to read high fantasy stuff right now, so it's kind of on the back burner right now. Anyways, the next book I read was The Kingdom of the Wicked. I gave this 2 stars. I didn't enjoy this. I disliked it, but I understand the merit in it. It was just kind of, everything was bland about this book in general. I was really excited for like an enemies to lovers, demon, 7 sins concept. Oh, I loved it. The concept is such a good concept. I love this concept, but I thought the execution was very poor. The next book I read was The Gentleman's Guide to Vices and Virtues. I gave this 3 stars. I actually think I might change this because I didn't like this book. I didn't like it that much. There's parts of this I did enjoy. I enjoyed seeing his sister's storyline. I enjoyed seeing his lover's storyline. I did not enjoy our main character really at all. I thought he was so, like, I'm very empathetic to the situation, but I thought he was so privileged and so, like, I understand, like, it was hard for him to see outside of himself, but, like, I didn't like our main character. The next book I read was The Dragon Reborn, which is the 3rd book in the Wheel of Time series. And again, I gave this 4.5 stars. I enjoyed this book the most in comparison to all the 3 that I've read so far. The next book I read was the 3rd book in the Broken Earth trilogy, which is The Skystone. I liked it more than the 2nd book, but I felt kind of meh about it. Like, I thought it was like an okay conclusion. I'm meh. And I think it's also just I had very high standards from that first book that I was like really expecting more from this trilogy, but I felt kind of meh, so I gave it 3 stars. The next book I read was Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thompson, and I really had a fun time with this. This is a great, fun, easy read, queer, YA, like fantasy book if you want that. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which is in the Brown Sisters trilogy, the 1st book, and it was so fun. I really enjoyed this. It was 4 stars, and yeah, smutty, fun, you know, has all of the, you know, happy romantic comedy kind of stuff that you would see. The next book I read was The Poppy War by Rf Quang. I did not like this book. I gave it 2 stars. Again, I understand the merit, and I really enjoyed like the first half of this book, and then I just really disliked our main character in the second half of the book. The next book I read was a 2nd book in the Brown Sisters trilogy, which is Take a Hint, Danny Brown. I gave this one also 4 stars. I think I enjoyed this one more than Chloe Brown's. The next book I read was Call Me By Your Name. I gave it 3.5 stars. There's aspects I enjoyed and aspects I didn't enjoy. I enjoyed the writing and how like it really pulls you into this story. Like, it's very atmospheric and this writing is great, but it was kind of a toxic relationship, and I don't really want to go into like all of the details about it because, you know, I have to talk about 100 books in this video. So if you guys want, I can do a dedicated review about it, but I'm just nah. So I gave it 3.5 stars because I felt kind of mad, but I did enjoy a lot of aspects about it. And the next book I read was After Age, Eve Brown. I gave this 4 stars. This was probably my favorite of the Brown Sisters trilogies. I love it. It was fun. I thought our main character was, both our main characters were great. They were fun. They were, it's the smut scenes too. Chef's kiss. The next book I read was Gideon the Ninth. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed Gideon, our main character, and I really disliked Caro. I thought their relationship was kind of toxic, but it is what it is. And also, like, the setting and stuff was kind of messy, but, you know, whatever. The next book I read was Wolf Song, and I read this because TJ Klune, the same author of The House in the Cerulean Sea, I was expecting it to be better, but, like, it was kind of like a gay werewolf Twilight. And it was overly angsty, so I gave it 3 stars because I just wasn't, it was just kind of overly angsty. The next book I read was Master of One. I enjoyed this, but not because it was necessarily a good book. I think it was just exactly what I needed at the time when I was reading. I gave this 4 stars, and yeah, everything about this book was kind of shallow, but it was like what I needed at the time. It was fun. The next book I read was Every Heart a Doorway. I really enjoyed this book. This is 4.5 stars. Has an explicitly ace character. Our main character is explicitly ace, and that's fun. The next book I read was The Dragon Slayer. Meh. I gave it 3 stars. I felt meh about the whole book in general, and I totally forgot there was dragons in this book as well, so I guess there's that. I'm just going to talk about the next 3 books I read in succession, which is the Adventures Time comics, which is Here There Be Gerblins, Murder on the Rockport Limited, and Petals to the Middle, and I really enjoyed these books. I love the podcast. I recommend the podcast a lot more than the comics, but it is so fun seeing these characters brought to life. The next book I read was Girls of Paper and Fire, and I gave it 3.5 stars. I enjoyed a lot of it, but again, I don't think I really enjoyed our main character. The next book I read was The Heart Forger, which is the second book in the Bone Witch series. I enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I'll talk about the next 2 books. The next 2 books were The Bond of Flame and Trial by Sorcery, which is Dragon Riders of Austin books on books 1 and 2. And they're kind of meh. They're middle of the road kind of fantasy books. There's nothing that stands out about them. There's nothing that really is intriguing about them, to be honest. It was just kind of like easy to get through. They're very, very short reads. I gave both of those 3 stars because it was kind of middle of the road. The next book I read was Down Among the Sticks and Bones, which is the second book. And then I also read Beneath the Sugar Sky, which is the third book in the Wayward Children series. For Down Among the Sticks and Bones, I gave 4 stars, and Beneath the Sugar Sky, I gave 3 stars. The next book I read was The Seep, and this one is weird. If you want a weird book, it's a weird alien invasion book, and I gave this one 3 stars. The next book I read was the 4th, 5th, and 6th books in the Wayward Children series. For In an Absent Dream, I gave 3.5 stars. For Come Tumbling Down, I gave 3 stars. I thought it was kind of like we're kicking a dead horse at this point. And then for the 6th book, Across the Green Grass Fields, I gave 4 stars. I really enjoyed this one. This one was fun. The next book I read was House of Hollow. I gave 2.5 stars because it was kind of dragging and kind of boring at times. It felt like a very long book for what it was, and it was okay. It's weird. The next book I read was Ghostopolis. It was cute. It was 3 stars. Again, it's just kind of a meh read. It's a comic graphic novel for middle grade, but it was just kind of meh. The next book I read was Middle Game by Seanan Mcguire. I didn't really like this one. I gave 2.5 stars. I thought, again, it was dragging. The pacing was off for me. I felt like it could have been condensed more than it was. The next book I read was this first book in the Cassidy Blake series, and it's the City of Ghosts. I enjoyed this book. It was really fun. It was great. I enjoyed our characters a lot, and I gave 4 stars for this. The next book I read was also a graphic novel, and it's The Girl from the Sea. This one's cute. It was wholesome. I felt kind of meh about it, so I gave 3 stars, but the art is very cute. The next book I read was the second book in the Cassidy Blake series, which is Tunnel of Bones, and I also enjoyed this one. I gave 4 stars as well. The next book I read was The Order of the Pure Moon Reflected in Water by Zen Cho, and I gave this 3.5 stars. I enjoyed a lot of aspects, but I also disliked a lot of our aspects in here. I thought the world could have been very fleshed out, and it was very cool. It feels like the author had more to say about this world, but we didn't really get that because it was kind of like a novella type of story. So yeah. The next book I read was Gone Girl. I have a review on this. I gave this 4 stars. The first half was a struggle to get through, but the second half was great. It was fast-paced. I couldn't put it down in the second half, but that first half was, oh, I almost DNF'd it in that first half. The next book I read was Blackwater Sister. This was also a fun time. If you like ghost, romances, sapphic romance, and family drama, I guess, this is great. It is 4 stars. I gave it 4 stars. I enjoyed it. The next book I read was Piranesi. I really enjoyed this. This is one of my favorite books of the year of 2021, and it is so whimsical and so unsettling at the same time. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend. The next book I read was The Bear and the Nightingale by Katherine Arden. I gave it 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it, but like I was not what I was expecting at the time. It is very much like the pacing of these books in general were just kind of all over the place. Like I didn't enjoy the pacing for these books, but I really enjoy Vasya, our main character. The next book I read was the third book in the Dragon Riders of Osnan series, and it's called The Warrior's Call. It was also middle of the road, kind of meh. I could continue, I could not continue with the series. I don't really care about anything in this book. I gave it 3 stars. The next book I read was Johnny Appleseed. This is also one of my favorites of the year. It is so great. It's about an indigenous queer two-spirit young man and his life, and it feels so real, and I really enjoyed this book, so yeah. The next book I read was She Who Became the Sun. I really enjoyed this book. I gave this 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed our main character. She is cutthroat and I love it. The next book I read is Small Spaces by Katherine Arden. I really enjoyed this series in general. I gave this 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this. Is kind of middle grade horror-ish book, and it is so fun, and it was great to read in October. I loved it. The next book I read was The Shining. I really enjoyed this book as well. I gave it 4.5 stars, and I knew nothing about The Shining prior to reading this book other than like the weird scene in the movie where there's like twins and he's like on his tricycle thing. That's all I knew about this movie, and the here's Johnny. That's all I knew about this book and this movie going into it, and I really enjoyed it. The next book I read was The Outsiders. I gave this 4 stars, also by Stephen King. And yeah, I feel like it was a fairly predictable storyline, but like the characters were great, the pacing was great, the plotline was great, and it was fun. The next 2 books I read were also from Small Spaces, that series, and it's Dead Voices and Dark Waters. And I gave both of these 3.5 stars just because I guess it didn't match up to the level of that first book, but I really enjoyed these 2. They were fun. I liked it, but like more on the mess side of liked it. The next book I read was Sadie by Courtney Summers, and I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I listened to the audiobook of this one, and the format of this audiobook was really fun. The next book I read was Indigenous Rights, A Guide to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Issues in Canada. And this is because this was our required reading for our last semester, my last semester. And I didn't give this a rating because I don't give like nonfiction stuff ratings, but I really enjoyed the sass that this author brought in, and I really enjoyed it. It was a great time. Great discussions to have with this book. The next book I read was the second book in the Winter Night trilogy, which is The Girl in the Tower. I felt kind of meh, but like also starting to dislike this book. So it was 2.5 stars I gave it, and it was kind of like, yeah, at this point I was just like, I don't even know if I wanted to continue with the series, but yeah. The next book I read was The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, and I thought this was a fun time. I know that the author didn't really do research on autism stuff, is what he said, I'm pretty sure, but it was fun to get into the mind of someone different, and it was a 4-star read for me. The next book I read was the third book in the Winter Nights trilogy, and it's The Winter of the Witch. Yeah, and I gave this 3.5 stars. Again, I felt kind of meh, but I liked it a little bit more, and I think it's because of Vasya, really, that's it. The next book I read was The Lost Sisters, and this is it's like a companion book to the Folk in the Air series, to the Cruel Prince series. I dislike Jude's sister. What's her name? The sister, I dislike her. 2 stars. The next book I read was Tangle Palace. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars, and that's because there's only certain stories in here that I was just not a fan of. There's 2 stories out of the 7 stories in here that I was like, eh, but the other 5 I really enjoyed. So this anthology got 4.5. I feel like dark fantasy, themes about death, love, retellings of fairy tales. Highly recommend. This was really fun, and this cover is so fun as well. The next book I read was A Charmed Life by Diana Wynne Jones, and I really enjoyed this book. I gave this 4 stars, and it was just fun to get through. The next book I read was the second book in this Crestomancy series, and that's The Lives of Christopher Chant, and I really enjoyed this book as well. It was really fun. These are middle grade kind of like fantasy stories, and they're really, really fun. And I love Diana Wynne Jones writing. She also wrote Howl's Moving Castle. So if you know the Studio Ghibli film Howl's Moving Castle, that vibe is very much carried through her books. So they have very similar vibes. And so if you like that vibe, that kind of like easy fantasy world kind of vibe, I really recommend her books. And then The Charmed Life, I gave 4 stars. No, the next book I read was Doom. I really, really enjoyed our main character. I really enjoyed the characters in this book. I gave it 4.5 stars, and this is in my notable mentions of the year. And I feel like this is the type of book you need to think about when you're reading it. So there's that. But I really, really, really enjoyed this book. And the next book I read was Under the Whispering Door. I love this book. I gave it 5 stars. I cried. I laughed. I love this book. And it is, if you like The House in the Cerulean Sea, you're probably going to like this book as well. And it is just so wholesome again. And oh, so cute. The next book I read was Master of Jinn. And I was disappointed with this book. I gave it 2 stars. I was very disappointed in this book. The next book I read was Ariadne. I gave it like 3.75, 3.5-ish, 4-ish, like somewhere in between there. I'm not totally sure, so I'm gonna stay 3.75-ish. And I think I only gave it as high as I did because I enjoy Greek retellings, and I enjoy Greek mythology. However, like, I just didn't see this as like a feminist text. The thing about like when you have feminism at the forefront of your book and about women being human, you have to, I don't know how to explain this, but like it just didn't feel like a feminist forward text, because like even if their lives are so crappy, like they still find something to love or something that is different. I don't know, like there's still humanity, and even if you have like a crappy life. And it was just like, I don't really know how to explain how I feel about this book, but it was fun. Yeah. The next book I read was The Daughter of the Pirate King. I really disliked this book. I gave it 1.5 stars. And I really, really had high hopes for this book. Everyone loved it. It's a pirate, enemies to lovers. But our main characters were so bland, and I was so freaking annoyed with our main girl being like, I could do this, I could do that, I could do this, I could do that. It was very predictable, very boring, very bland. All the characters were so bland, and it was just, oh, and it felt like the author already knew that she wanted these two together. Yes, so like all the build up to this, like all the tension build up, not existent. She kind of knew, and then she made us start kind of like here, and then all of a sudden it was like here. And yeah, it was just, I didn't enjoy it. And it really sucks because I love pirate stories, like One Piece. I love One Piece. One of my favorite animes. The next book I read was For the Wolf, which is the last book I read in this year, finally. I kind of left on a disappointing note there, which is 2.5 stars. And again, I was kind of disappointed. I enjoy retellings of stories, and this is kind of like a retelling mishmash of Red Riding Hood and Beauty and the Beast. But it felt like a retelling of the Disney version of Beauty and the Beast, to be honest. It followed very much that plot line. It followed kind of that storyline, and it like was okay. I didn't hate it. I thought it was kind of meh. But I also was starting to dislike it because it was starting to get like kind of boring, kind of repetitive. Also, I didn't care about the sister storyline in the village, like back home. Not like, I wanted to be more in the fantastical world elements of it rather than the village life of it. And I was just like, whatever. Those are all 100 books I read. I could go into stats just from my Goodreads here. So in the shortest book I read was Galatea, which was only 20 pages long. And the longest book that it says here is Order the Phoenix, but I actually think like maybe something of the Wheel of Time was longer, or maybe even Dune was longer than this. So I think it's more like a printing problem rather than the actual, like, I don't think that was the longest book I read, to be honest. I think maybe the printing was a little different. The average length of book I read was 364 pages, like an average mid-sized book. My average rating was 3.6 star rating, so that's a pretty good rating here, I would say. There's a lot of mediocre books you have to get through. That's all the rating stats on Goodreads there. I kind of don't want to go through all of like, oh, this is how many fantasy books and all those stats, so that's all the stats we're going to get. Thanks for watching. I hope we'll see you in the next video, and I hope you have a good day/night. Bye!